I feel bad for Jaru. He's just a theorist like the rest of us, and yet he constantly gets mocked by the community. I want to talk about his player theory and discuss some points about Jaru, his theories, and the Deltarune community. If you haven't yet, go watch Jaru's video, there's a link down in the description. When I first watched Jaru's video about the player, I thought the same thing as everyone else. Oh, look, another insane brain rot filled Deltarune theory, and continued thinking that all the way through the video. I even made some harmful comments that I really shouldn't have made. But the point is, I thought about his theory for a bit and I started to realize that his theory wasn't actually that wrong. He makes the claim that if Undertale's story is both a narrative and a meta-narrative at the same time with no barrier between the two, that would make it meaningless, because if Undertale's narrative acknowledges the player as real, it must also acknowledge the game and everything inside itself as fake. And that if Deltarune doesn't have a scapegoat, we can blame the behavior of the soul on Deltarune's story would end up being meaningless. Which is a pretty reasonable assumption. The problem is that this is not how he presents his theory. He presents the idea that before Undertale came out, games usually only had either a narrative or a meta-narrative. And that Undertale was the first to combine the two. This is not true. Then he says this.
Either A, Toby Fox has lost his touch and accidentally ruined the plot of his game, or B, there is a regular narrative explanation for this scene, and the barrier between the two narratives that he achieved in Undertale is still present in Deltarune. This divide between these two options is where I ended up pretty quickly when I first started analyzing Deltarune. Undertale is my favorite game of all time, thus I had complete faith in Toby Fox's writing skills. That meant I had no choice but to conclude that option B must be the correct one.
Yikes, yeah, this is pretty badly worded. It's not only wrong but also feels very accusatory towards Toby. If he truly, quote, had faith in Toby's writing, he would support the story whether it's a narrative or meta-narrative. But saying Toby needs to make the story this way implies that Jaru thinks Toby is unable to write it any other way, even if that's not what he meant. But other than that, the only real issue with his theory is conveying the points to his audience. I'd say this is one of Jaru's best theories. Everyone has a theory about what the soul physically is if it's representing the player. Whether it's Des, Asriel, the angel or Gaster. Nobody believes it's purely the player acting alone. How else would you explain Chris's seemingly former knowledge of the soul? They already had the cage set up as if they knew they might need to rip the soul out at any point, and they always seem to know when they're out of view or hearing range. And when Chris leaves the bathroom to slash the tires, Toriel says Chris does this sometimes. Clearly they have experienced something similar in the recent past. When you look into it, there's so much evidence that the soul is so much more than just a vessel we inhabit. And this is what I think Jaru wanted to convey with his video. Not that the player was meaningless, but that the player might not be the only thing pulling the strings.